entrepreneur. He likes country music. He's a cat food owner. He's a decent cook. He's a social media expert. He's a son and a brother. He considers himself a very bad singer, adrenaline junkie, and all-around adventurous guy. Trent Dyrsmid is giving his icebreaker today, telling us about how he succeeded in building and selling his company. The title of his speech is One Mistake at a Time. It's 4 to 6 minutes. Please welcome Trent Dyrsmid. One mistake at a time. One mistake at a time. Trent Dyrsmid.
Del Martians. What a pleasure to be up here this morning on September 16th of 2008. I packed my bags from my hometown of Vancouver, where I've grown up, loaded myself into a U-Haul truck, moved down to Seattle to open a new office for my rapidly growing technology company, and I felt on top of the world. 6 weeks later, on October 28th, 2008, I received a phone call from my co-founder issuing an ultimatum that he and the chief operating officer, if I didn't accept their lowball offer for my company, they were both going to quit the next day and leave me hanging in the wind. It was at that moment that I realized that I probably made a couple of mistakes. So unlike many speeches where a CEO gets up and tells you how brilliant he is and all the strategic moves that he made, this is not going to be one of those speeches. However, this speech does have a happy ending, and the happy ending culminates in standing here on the floor today. So the story starts January of 2008. I decided to hire an outside chief operating officer, a fellow by the name of Nick. We'll leave his last name out. And I'd known Nick for a long time. I'd known him for 6 or 7 years. And I brought Nick on because he'd just been bought out of his very large company. And he brought with him a checkbook. He was planning on investing in my company, becoming an active participant. And he brought a Rolodex of government contacts, which I and he believed would turn into a significant amount of business for us. So by June of that year, I realized that there was one of my first mistakes brewing because Nick hadn't written his check yet. We hadn't come to an agreement on the shareholder contract, and things were not. His Rolodex hadn't produced any results to speak of, and I really couldn't figure out what I paid him for in the first 6 months. Despite that fact, I had a very strong desire to expand my business and a strong desire to move to the U.S. So I decided, using my autonomy as CEO, to open an office in Seattle, a sales office, to expand the business. And Nick and Ed, the co-founder, weren't terribly on board with this decision, but hey, I had a lot of autonomy, so I could do all my mistakes on my own. So I started to commute back and forth. By September of that year, Nick had still not bought into the company. And the place that I was living, because I had sold my home to fund the company, so I was in a rental in the place that I was living in. The owner decided to sell it, and I thought, hey, there must be a sign. Pack my bags, get my visa, move down to Seattle, figure I'll conclude the negotiations with Nick, and we'll ride off into the sunset and I'll be successful. September rolls around, and I'm on a business trip in San Diego, first time I'd been here in years and years and years. And I was talking with another CEO, telling him about this situation, because you got to get that guy to get off the pot. So I phoned Nick up and I said, Nick, you need to make a decision on this. Are you in or are you out? He said, give me 2 days. 2 days later, he says, I'm not going to buy in. I've just moved to Seattle. I'm now the distant CEO. And he said, but I am committed to staying with you for another year, and we'll then reevaluate. So I said, good enough for me. So things continued to go forward until the ultimatum phone call. And my co-founder had offered me $200,000 as a down payment and a bunch of other details. And I thought, this is odd. That's ironically the same amount of money that Nick was going to be putting into the company. And my co-founder never had 2 cents to rub together. And my time is rapidly disappearing. So to make a very long story short, we were in a meeting with a banker. The banker asked where the $200,000 came from. Ed had said, hey, it's not my money, or sorry, that he got it from investors and that Nick had nothing to do with it. But when you're in the banker's room, everybody needs to tell the truth, and Nick said that it was his money. It was at that moment that I realized that I had a fox in my in-house. So to wind my story up, I was very, very fortunate in that earlier I had another company offer to buy my company, so I got to play the two off of each other. I didn't have to accept their lowball offer, and I was able, ultimately they did buy the company, but I was able to get them to pay more. So I sold, I packed my bags, I loaded my moving truck, and off to San Diego I went. And in doing so, I realized a childhood dream from about mid-teens of living here in Southern California, and I could not be happier. I think that probably the best thing about this story, and there's a lot more mistakes that I made, but in 4 to 6 minutes, you just can't cover them all. I have one shareholder in my company, and I'll call him my rich dad, and he had an expression for me, and I encourage you to adopt this in your own lives. No matter what happens, I am 100% responsible. I could look at those guys and say they teamed up and screwed me over, blah, 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 but only I would be the worst for that, because I would be carrying that chip on my shoulder and that bad attitude. And I realized that it was a series of decisions that I made along the way, how I used my independence and my autonomy to run the company and make the decisions that I did that caused Ed to feel the things that he felt, and to cause Nick to feel the things that they felt, and make them make the decisions that they made. They're up there running the company. I don't have to work with them. I'm down here in sunny Southern California